Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Your brothers and sisters from all over the world, we're all here to show our deepest regards and tribute towards our beloved Murabbi, Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah. We have the honor to host two of his closest colleagues and students, Dr. Abdallah Rothman and Dr. Alizi bin Alias. Unfortunately, Brother Qasim could not join us today, but he sends his salams to all of you. He is the son of Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah. He was not able to attend today, but he's sending his salams, and the whole Professor Badri's family is sending their salams as well. So this is the third time that we're highlighting this very important person, and also why we chose these days is because Professor Malik Badri passed away during this period 2 years ago. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all the things that we're doing in ISIP and all Islamic psychology movement as Sadaqah Jariyah for Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah. We always say that ISIP is Professor Malik Badri's. Honestly, we will never be here without him. And I personally never met him, but I feel like I met him spiritually. I have the spiritual connection with him. And I had the honor to study under Dr. Rothman's excellent leadership, the CMC program, which is essentially a program that was established by Professor Badri and Dr. Rothman. So alhamdulillah, we have studied in the silsila of Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah. So today we will know more about Professor Badri from Dr. Aliz and Dr. Abdallah's encountering as close colleagues, associates, and students of Professor Badri. And as we always say, the Islamic psychology movement, the way we see it today, is thanks to his pioneering work. So hope everything we do is Allah accepts as Sadaqah Jariyah. Let me go to next slide, inshallah. All right. So today's agenda, dear brothers and sisters, we'll just recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Also make a dua for Professor Badri. So think about Professor Badri as we recite Surah Al-Fatiha, inshallah. And then we, after that, just go through some guidelines, and we have some certificate of appreciation for our beloved speakers today. And after the whole keynote speech from both of them, we will also have some opportunities for colleagues of ours, students, and just mental health professionals and just fellow Muslims to share their reflections about their relationship with Professor Badri, whether it's through meeting him personally, working with him, or even through his work, inshallah. And Sister Fatima, one of the co-founders of ISIP, will give more details about that. We will also have some Q&As where you guys can ask questions, particularly to Dr. Abdallah, Dr. Alizi, and we are also at your service if it's anything, inshallah. So let's start by just reciting Surah Al-Fatiha. We also want you to have Dr. Fatima Abdallah in your du'as, dear brothers and sisters. Dr. Fatima, the wife of Professor Badri, she has had some health issues for a while. So if we can collectively have her in our du'a, so that we wish for her, wish that Allah will give her shifa and speedy recovery, inshallah. She sends her salams as well to all of you. And we're very honored to have them with us as part of our advisory board in ISIP. So let's go to next slide. Dear brothers and sisters, just briefly about the Zoom etiquettes. Keep muted your microphone at all times. This is just for the benefit of the whole session, inshallah. No recordings or screenshots are allowed. We will share the recording of this tribute a couple of days from now in our YouTube channel, and link to the YouTube channel and other ISIP related resources will be shared in the Zoom chat, inshallah. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. If you need any live transcriptions, please feel free to press the more button in the bottom of the Zoom application, and then just request it and you will get access to it, inshallah. Briefly about ISIP, for all of you who do not know, we're trying to be an inclusive space designed to connect people with diverse backgrounds interested in Islamic psychology, and our aim is really to disseminate knowledge, share resources, and discuss best practices in a free and accessible manner. So everything we do is free of charge. So you're most welcome to join us in our different initiatives. We also want to be a platform to enable further development of people's personal and professional interests, studies, and understanding of Islamic psychology within their communities and countries of origin. And today we actually have Dr. Alizi from Malaysia, and Professor Badri was very much active in Malaysia for many parts of his life, and he was working at IAIP, the International Islamic University of Malaysia, and we have the honor to have a very great relationship with IAIP, and we're partnering with them through our Malaysian chapter. So essentially, by traveling with Professor Badri, you will see that he is, in a sense, the universal embodiment of Islamic psychology movement. You know, his roots in Sudan, working in UK with the CMC program, being in Malaysia, being in Turkey, etc. So we're trying to go in his footsteps as well as an international movement. Feel free to check ISIP's YouTube channel if you want to subscribe, and you can join our psychology WhatsApp groups or research sharing. Our colleagues will share the link in the Zoom chat, and you can become a member on our website where you can get access to our digital library, which is free of charge. A lot of people are actually asking for more resources from Professor Badri. So we have a whole folder dedicated to Professor Badri resources as well for you to benefit from. All right, today's speakers, dear brothers and sisters, are excellent speakers, and I had the honor to have both of them as teachers and learned a lot from both of them, subhanAllah. So Dr. Alizi bin Alias, he has a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. Please forgive me, Dr. Alizi, for my lack of my Bahasa Malay, but I hope I'm pronouncing right. Kebangsaan, Malaysia, UKM. He's the co-founder of Psychospiritual Institute, organizational psychology consultant, and a lecturer at UNIMY and OUM. Dr. Abdallah Rothman is the principal of Cambridge Muslim College, UK. He's also the executive director of International Association of Islamic Psychology, which is the official body of Islamic psychology worldwide. And he's also, we have the honor to have Dr. Abdallah and also Dr. Aliz as part of our advisory board at ISIP. We really recommend you guys to benefit from IAIP and their works as well. And Professor Malik Badri established actually IAIP as well, together with Dr. Rothman. Brother Qasim is not with us today, so we send our salams to him, but he is the son of Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah. All right, this is just certificate of appreciation to both of you, Dr. Alizi. This is from us as ISIP. We want to really highlight the excellency and what you have contributed to the field of Islamic psychology, and also that you guys are furthering the legacy of Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah, which is amazing. So we appreciate all the excellencies that both of you and Dr. Abdallah, both of you are doing for further developing the field of Islamic psychology. Jazakallah khairan. And Brother Qasim is not here with us, so we will share this with him later, inshallah. All right. So this is a quote from Professor Malik Badri, which is a profound quote that we would like to share. And I want to thank the design team of ISIP for doing this poster. And Professor Malik Badri says, whenever I combine my behavior and cognitive therapy with Islamic teachings and spiritual sentiments, the improvement in my patients were beyond my expectations. SubhanAllah. So much insights that we can learn from Professor Badri's clinical work as well, which I know that both Dr. Rothman and Dr. Aliz are very familiar with. All right, I will now stop sharing my screen. Or we have another quote, by the way. Shall we take this later? Inshallah, yeah, we'll take it later, yeah. Inshallah. So without any further ado, I will stop sharing my screen. And Dr. Alizi, as the first speaker, feel free to unmute yourself. The floor is yours. We're looking forward to listening about your reflections about Professor Badri's contributions, inshallah. Most welcome.
Dr. Abdullah first, isn't it? Sorry?
Sorry, Dr. Alizi?
It's supposed to be Dr. Abdullah first.
Oh, was it supposed to be Dr. Abdullah first? Okay, fine.
Isn't it? Sorry.
No problem. We can take Dr. Abdullah first. Dr. Abdullah, without any further ado, the floor is yours. Most welcome, Dr. Abdullah. An honor to have you with us.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be here with you all and with my esteemed brother and colleague, Dr. Alizi. And we look forward to hearing your talk next. Thank you so much, Sayyid Jamaluddin and Sister Fatima and ISIP for these lovely honor of the certificate and really for hosting this. I hope you keep this up every year because it's nice to, like we always say, Dr. Badri's legacy is alive and well in the development of the field and everything that's going on. But I think it's really important that we revisit the impact of his life and sort of celebrating and honoring his life every year to remind us and stay connected. And it's lovely to, on one hand, it's sad to think that it's been 2 years. On the other hand, it's really nice to just see everybody coming together to remember our teacher. So I want to talk about Dr. Malik's legacy. And I will do that by talking a bit about some of the early influences in his life that led to his legacy, and some major contributions, specifically in relation to a recent article that I published, and how that illustrates how his legacy really evolved over time, and that we can't just look at one section of his life or think of it in one aspect of any of this arc of his trajectory, but to see his whole development and evolution. And then, understanding, touching upon what I learned from him towards the end of his life, what he sort of left for us to carry forward the field, sort of guidance for the development, and then really culminating what that legacy is that he's leaving us. So Dr. Malik's early influences really impact or shape what he was able to bring forward. And, we see him as he's this incredible personality, incredible mind, and he brought so much. And a lot of that is his personality, but all of us were shaped by our experiences and the situation that Allah sets up for us and brings us into the world. And so Dr. Malik's father, Babakr Badri, was also an incredibly influential figure in Sudan. A lot of people don't know about him outside of Sudan, but in Sudan, everybody knows the name Babakr Badri because he was, and this is him in the top right corner, he was really a powerful influence in holding firm to Islamic tradition and innovating in a way that's calling back to the values of the deen from a way that is, sometimes going against what the popular contemporary movement is. And so in his case, he started women's education. So on the bottom here is Ahfad University, which is now a university that looks like this in Durman in Khartoum, but it started in the little town of Rufaa. This is a picture in the middle of a picture I took in Rufaa just a few months ago, actually, but it looks pretty much similar to it did when Dr. Badri grew up here. So he was born in Rufaa, grew up, and his father established this girls' education because he had lots of children. He had these girls, and girls weren't educated at the time, and he was sort of standing up against that and saying, no, this is not right. This is not aligned with our tradition. Women should have a place in education. They should be educated. And so he started an all-girls university, which is now an extremely large and prestigious university that my wife's cousins have graduated from there and work there, and it's a thriving place that is headed by Dr. Malik's brother. And so he, from an early age, was part of seeing this influence of his father of innovating and taking a stand and doing things against the popular trends in society, but that harken back to a more rooted place in the values of Islam. And so this, I think, made an impact. And I like how in the picture of Babakr Badri, he has this staff that he's like holding firm. And this is really, we see this in Dr. Badri's character, in that he was so grounded and solid in his connection to Islam and not afraid to do what is right and to go against the grain. And so in this origin of Rufaa, this place, he also early on was experiencing at a young age traditional healing. And so this top picture is they would have in Sudan, there's masjids where they have group dhikr, and it is part of a traditional spirituality, but also part of healing. And so they have like holistic healing that includes adhkar, ruqya, natural remedies. So it's physical, it's emotional, it's psychological, and it's spiritual healing, and a social aspect of like group therapy or group dhikr, and this integration. And so he was seeing this early on. And when he came into psychology, he started to study it, but not as an insider, as an outsider. And we'll see a little bit later in his life how he comes back full circle to that. But in his early days, this was influencing him. This is a map of where Rufaa is. It's about 2.5 hours outside of Khartoum. And so these were his early influences. And, he was also an early influencer. So we talk about influencers now as being people who have lots of followers on Instagram, but Dr. Badri was impacting the world on a global scale even before he was starting to make his contributions in academic work and psychology. So before he ever even published anything that we would know about, when he was still a student, he came in contact with Malcolm X and was the first person that really introduced him to Islam. On Malcolm X's first trip to Africa, he was, engaging with the African people in a place where he was finding this connection to his home, and he made this intimate connection with Professor Malik. And Dr. Malik's way about him always has been, he's very patient. Even when he knows the truth, even when he knows what is right, he's patient with people for them to get up to speed. And this is what he did with all of us, really. The whole field of Islamic psychology, he was ahead of his time always, and he was waiting for us to catch up with him. And I think we're still trying to get there. But with Malcolm X, he had this relationship where they remained close. So they remained close over time, and this was how Malcolm X actually eventually embraced Islam, and he wound up taking the name Malik because of this connection to Malik Badri. And I highly recommend, if you haven't, a few years before Professor Malik passed away, Allah have mercy on him, I set up this talk where he goes into detail about his relationship with Malcolm X. You can find it on our Cambridge Muslim College YouTube channel. And it's really, why is this important? Because we're seeing that Dr. Malik's legacy is beyond just Islamic psychology. He was such an influential figure that he was impacting Islam in general on a global scale. The amount of impact that Malcolm X has made as a figure in popular culture, and bringing Islam to the world, sort of in this dawah, you find Dr. Malik Badri behind the scenes in this huge impact globally with Islam. And so after this point in time, he made a lot of major academic contributions. So I want to talk about the arc of these contributions without going into detail, because there are so many. So we recently published this article in the American Journal of Islam and Society called the Contributions and Impact of Malik Badri, Father of Modern Islamic Psychology. I published it with Dr. Rania Awad and one of our students on the Islamic Psychology diploma at Cambridge Muslim College. And in this article, we lay out sort of the arc. We lay out an exhaustive list of all of his publications, which literally, it's a table that takes up 5 pages. He had so many works, many of which we can't even find. It's hard to find them in publication, but he was very active. But this timeline sort of pinpoints in a chronological order the major point of contribution. And what you can see and what we highlighted is that there is an arc to his trajectory that changed focus over time. So on the left-hand side, you see from the beginning, 1963, this is after this interaction with Malcolm X, and he's, developing, but he's focused on indigenization of psychology. And so it goes all the way down to when he got in more into Islamic psychology. And so I want to look more, split these up. So this is how it looks. So you probably couldn't see the other one. So this is the first sort of half with these two themes: indigenization of psychology, moving into globalization of indigenous psychology, up until the publication of Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists. And then after that point, moving into the Islamization of psychology with his time in Malaysia. And then in the end of his trajectory, really moving into the development of Islamic psychology and indigenization of Islamic psychology, really rooting it, not in a adaptation, but in a bottom-up approach. And so I want to look a little bit more at this arc and the development and evolution of his thought. And so really we could say that he himself was evolving Islamic psychology. It wasn't just this one thing and he had this one message, but it was developing over time as he himself grew, but also as the world became more and more ready for this to come forward. And it follows the whole arc of his life. He was never static. He was always emergent. He was always being creative and developing his ideas and really responding to the times. So we have to look at his whole trajectory. And so this is this evolution of these different themes. And so I want to go a little bit on just to point out each one. So looking at these first two, this first half, in his early career, when he's first getting into psychology, he's looking at psychology based on those early influences that we talked about in Rufa and the spiritual healing traditions. He was going in and studying them. He would go to these masjid and he would bring his students even and study what they're doing and take the people out of the dhikr when they're in these istihwal, these like spiritual states, and try to find out what's going on with them psychologically. And he was starting to use this traditional indigenous experience to understand his Western training in psychology from the UK and other, and saying, recognizing that there is this bias in Western psychology that is he was looking at all of the Arab, all of the children's drawings that they were using for tests were all white European children. And so he developed an indigenized version with Arab children. He's looking at innovating, saying, look, we need to look at this from a different perspective. And so he was really in the first stages of his career in psychology, pioneering new perspectives. And then we'll see later on, he comes full circle back to this spiritual healing, but more from on the inside. But at this point in his life, he's looking at it as from an outside perspective, really from his psychology training, what is different about this approach to psychology within a traditional grounding. And then he takes all of these ideas, and in the second stage of his contributions, we're calling this globalization of indigenous psychology. So he's taken all of this insight into innovating, hey, we need to look at psychology from a different lens, sort of like, there's these cultural, social influences that change how we need to be looking at psychology. And he's influencing on an international scene. So he takes all that knowledge, he's going to conferences all over the world, he's following the modern trends of psychology, he's engaged with people. He even influenced the development of the 12-step program, even though that was developed before his time. But the ideas of being grounded in God, in healing, he had experience from this, and he was helping people understand what does it mean to be grounded in a paradigm of spirituality and how that. And so he was not only following modern trends, but really influencing them. And then at this point in this stage, he presented his landmark book, which started as an article, which turned into the book, The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists, which ironically, with all of his time in the Muslim world, gets the most traction in America, in the US, in the West. And this is how he's really on the global scene of influencing indigenous psychology. And this is a time when the mainstream psychology is starting to wake up to the need to integrate spirituality and different paradigms of philosophies and realities into approaches to psychology. And so he's really paving the way to eventually move towards an Islamic psychology. And these ideas that he put forth in this book in 1979, which was so before his time, are still relevant today, still speaking to the times that we are at today in terms of people's willingness and ability to sort of wake up to this different epistemological paradigm. And so now going into the second half of this timeline, he entered into this Islamization of psychology phase. So he's moving from the indigenization into, well, now what does it look like to have a uniquely Islamic approach? And this is about the time he goes to Malaysia and he's at IIUM. And at the time at IIUM, you have a big movement of the Islamization movement with Al-Atas and others, and a lot of work happening there, which I'm sure Professor Alizi can tell us about firsthand. And at that end, this time, it's really the focus is on adapting psychology from within the knowledge of the Islamic sciences. And some of that becomes a cultural reorientation. So it's taking the canon of Western psychology and Islamizing it, right? So changing it to fit with Islam. And this winds up being a lot of focus on Muslims doing psychology. And so a lot of the conferences, he started the International Association of Muslim Psychologists. And this was, even though he had already started developing his ideas about what we could call Islamic psychology now, the reality is that it took time for people to catch up with him. And people weren't ready for that strong of a message. And so it was about this sort of reorientation of psychology from within Islam. And it was, I always like to say that, he was so ahead of his time that people weren't catch up with him, but because he was so patient and gentle and really in service of this message, that he was willing to just be where people were at and stay with their level, even though his ideas were more advanced. But thankfully, he was able to continue this evolution. And this is when he moves into the indigenization of Islamic psychology, sort of after his time in, he was in Malaysia, I believe around 1992, and around about the end of the 90s, early 2000s, he comes back full circle to Rufaa in Sudan, and comes back to this masjid, and a specific masjid in Rufaa that he goes back to, where he finds a sheikh that he's studying with, literally happens to be down the street from where he grew up. But he didn't have any connection with that before, but his life brings him back around. And now he's starting to, whereas before he was studying these spiritual healing traditions and Islamic spirituality from the outside, now he's on the inside, really recognizing how this can be integrated with psychology from a more indigenous paradigm of psychology that is grounded in spirituality. And so this is when he starts to move more into the spiritual orientation. He's studying tafakkur, contemplation. He does his book on contemplation and really bringing spiritual states and the spiritual orientation to the therapeutic milieu. And this becomes a really big shift of moving towards an actual grounded bottom-up Islamic psychology. And this is when, so I come into contact with him around this stage in 2005 in Sudan, in Rufa, with this sheikh in this masjid is where I met Malik Badri for the first time. And I was studying with this sheikh, who he was studying with, but I didn't know him. And the sheikh knew I was a psychologist. He said, I want you to meet one of my students who's also a psychologist. So he sets up a meeting, and I'm thinking it's somebody my age or younger. And little did I know it's Professor Malik Badri, who I didn't know who he was. But so I wound up spending quite a lot of time with him in Sudan. We went to a conference on Muslim psychology in Sudan. And this is when it's still this transition from Muslim psychology to, not yet really come out in Islamic psychology, but this is what he and I were talking a lot about. And we're at this conference and, it's all in Arabic, so I'm having a hard time understanding everything. And I tell him that, I was like, I'm not really following. And he leans over and whispers to me, he's like, don't worry, you're not missing out on much. Because it was basically, he was moving to be more ready. He was sort of tired of talking about the same Western psychology with Muslims. And it wasn't as innovative and moving towards this spiritually grounded version. And so this is when we started devising and having discussions about the International Association of Islamic Psychology right around 2008. And we actually came up with the idea in 2008, but we didn't, he had this real keen sense of when the right time is, because he was such a, he had basira. He was able to see and sense when the world is ready for things. And so it was from 2005 when we first started talking about this all the way till 2017 until he said, okay, now it's time. And at this time, in 2017, we connected with Professor Rashid Skinner. He sort of brought the three of us together. This picture here is in Sudan with Professor El-Zubair Bashir Taha, who was one of Professor Malik's first students and huge influence in the development of Islamic psychology in Sudan. And this is when he says, okay, now it's time to really root the movement in an indigenous approach. And we're now going to start instead, this new association, the International Association of Islamic Psychology. And this is kind of what he was saying, where the field needs to go next, and that the world is ready for it because of all the global developments that he was so tapped into and keen on and following and pioneering. And so in that, this is some of the guidance that I have collated from him on what are the next steps that we need to do to develop the field. And I think these first three are fundamental to the establishment of the field, which is what he guided my work to be. This is why I've focused on these things, really, is reorienting the epistemological foundations of psychology. So basically not just taking the Western secular version, but reorienting it from the sources of knowledge. And then the second is delineating what does an Islamic paradigm of psychology look like? Why, from the bottom up rather than the top down, what is this model of how we see the self from Islamic psychology standpoint? And then once we have that established, creating new Islamically integrated approaches rather than just adapting ones that already exist, building them on that solid foundation. And then I think he was feeling like we had made a lot of progress on these first three. And so and about the same time, sort of establishing the professional standards of practice was his next thing, which is, the IAIP has been in existence now since 2017, but now we've been focusing in the past year on really establishing the professional standards of practice, putting together ethics documents and regulations. And so inshallah, and within the next year or so, this part is really going to be more of a global thing that moves the movement forward, inshallah. And then he really was stressing for people to work collaboratively across differences. Oftentimes there's people that have different approaches. Even within Islamic psychology, there's many different approaches. And he was saying there's room for everything. There's room for everybody. We need to band together. We need to work with one another. And there's room for ikhtilaf. And there's an adab al-ikhtilaf. There is a way to have differences of opinion and have adab with each other and allow for this unification and unity so that everybody can benefit, and not just the Muslim Ummah, but the world can benefit, inshallah. And then he was, all of this needs to sit within maintaining a spiritual connection to Allah at the heart. And that means in our hearts, but also at the heart of everything we do, remembering that it is only by permission of Allah that the healing happens, and that we need to bring the spirituality directly into psychology and psychotherapy, not to make it just about transactional religiosity, but about spiritual states and the state of the heart. This being something that he learned in that fourth phase of his life, going back to that traditional spirituality in Sudan. So to wrap it all up, I would say that, and these are, his legacy is huge. It is really hard. You can't put it into 4 bullet points, but I tried. And I would say one of the things is just, he was, I like this picture. He's strong in his belief, but yet he was so soft-hearted, and his approach was so soft, but firm. So he was always standing firm in faith. And this is something he always taught me, is to have courage and not to be afraid to stand in your belief, in your paradigm, and making Allah a reality. And then reviving traditional wisdom. It's not about innovating new principles. It's going back to the first principles, but reviving them and bringing them into the current day. So innovating new approaches that are for these current times, which he did throughout his whole trajectory. And then again, grounding psychology and spirituality is his legacy. And then I would say, really, and I think he would say this, matter of fact, he has said this, and I think we all need to realize that Dr. Badri's legacy really is the next generation of students of Islamic psychology. So inshallah, everyone here and all of the people who are benefiting from him and his students and his works and everything that has expanded from there, this is Dr. Malik's legacy. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for your patience and attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdallah. Such an amazing presentation and insight to Professor Malik Badri's both person and also contributions. And yeah, thank you so much. We are so honored to through your journey with him, allow us to be part of that journey, even though he's not with us physically, at least from a spiritual point of view. Thank you so much. Please, round of applause to our excellent speaker, Dr. Abdallah Rothman. Please, if you can be with us after Dr. Alizi's as well. I'm sure there is a lot of reflections and questions, Dr. Abdallah, but I know you have a lot to do. So if you also need to go, we totally understand. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to, shall we, Dr. Abdallah, shall we allow people to ask you a couple of questions now? Or is that better for you, like time-wise?
Up to you.
Yeah. So perhaps, yeah, we'll allow some people to ask questions. Brothers and sisters, if you have any questions, we usually don't unmute ourselves, but we can allow you to unmute yourself today if you just ask the question, please, so we don't have too much time. Or else, just write it in your chat. Nur Husna is writing, Dr. Abdallah, innovating new approaches in current times. People always misconception with innovation in religion. Can I know how to be balanced in terms to explain psychology and field connecting with Futuwa? Any reflections about that question, Dr. Abdallah?
I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I can answer it in the way that I think I'm understanding it. So I think the first part of it anyway, this word innovation, so the whole idea of innovating new approaches and this misconception with innovation in religion, or bid'ah, right? So we hear bid'ah as this thing that everybody is deathly afraid of. And the reality is, so first of all, there's innovation that is about it's not innovating new first principles, right? The paradigm that is laid out in the Quranic paradigm and all of the reality of our aqidah and our theological framework within Islam, none of that ever changes. It's completely solid and perfect. And we have the example of the Prophet ﷺ, whose sunnah and whose path is relevant for every time. But in order to understand how it's applied in every time, we need to revive these things and update them for the current times. It does not mean innovating new knowledge. It means innovating new ways of applying that knowledge so that it makes sense in the current milieu of our times. So this is the difference that people need to understand, is that we are innovating ways that make sense in the way that contemporary people's consciousness functions based on the historical trajectory of our social upbringing, that orients us in a completely different way than if we would look back to the Salaf al-Salih, like the original companions of the prophets lived in a completely different time. And so you wouldn't be able to say we do exactly what they did, because we don't have those things in place, and most of us are living in ways that are completely innovated from when they were. So we have to understand these things and make a difference. Innovating in religion is something different, but the reality is amongst the learned scholars is that there is bid'ah hasana. There is innovation that is good and is useful, but it needs to be done with knowledge, grounded in knowledge, so you know that you're not sacrificing those first principles. And this is ijtihad. Ijtihad is the ability to understand the context, be rooted in the knowledge, and be able to adapt things to make sense so that they are more in line with the original traditional essence of our approach and fitrah, so that it can be fully expressed in a different context.
MashaAllah. That's a great answer. And subhanAllah, it's good that you also alluded to, Dr. Abdallah, to the concept of bid'ah hasana. And you actually alluded to another concept, which was adab al-ikhtilaf. And we just had a very beautiful conversation in ISIP earlier today, where we definitely embodied adab al-ikhtilaf. So I just send this to my dear colleagues, that exactly what we witnessed was adab al-ikhtilaf. We listen to each other, we learn from each other, and it's okay to have different opinion, and then we will find consensus through ijma and the middle ground, which is the balanced approach. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Abdallah, for shedding light, and we're looking forward to have you with us throughout this session, inshallah. I'm going to now allow Dr. Alizi. By the way, round of applause again to Dr. Abdallah. Dr. Alizi, the floor is yours. Feel free to share your screen so we can also hear from you and your interactions with Professor Dr. Malik Badri. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan katsira, Brother Jamaluddin, Sister Fatima, Dr. Abdallah Rothman, and online listeners, online audience. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to deliver a tribute to Al-Marhum Professor Dr. Malik Badri. It's a difficult task for me actually to do, but I will try my best in a short period of time. As you can see, I've compiled a number of societies, associations, and also institutes that are relevant to the Islamization of psychology, and all are influenced directly or indirectly by Al-Marhum Professor Dr. Malik Badri. Some of them are from, I think, United Kingdom, Turkey, United States, Malaysia, Indonesia, Canada, and others. I'm glad that Dr. Abdullah had started with a very good introduction, which are very at both macro and maybe I say meso level, but allow me to be more micro in my approach more intimate, so to speak, I want to report my conversations with Prof. Almarhum Prof. Malik Badri during his time with me at IUM. I was working at IUM before. So these are questions that I think not many psychologists or students dare to ask, and I think it's maybe not published anywhere. I mean, Prof. Malik may have not have written it anywhere or shared it everywhere. So this is something very intimate that I would like to share with you. So prepare to listen to questions, and also some questions and some answers. Question number one. Before that, do you notice that birthday cake? Prof. Malik Badri's bought me a chocolate cake. We both like chocolates, and as some of you know, or you may be surprised that we share the same birth date or date of birth, which is on 16th February. Of course, Prof. Malik Badri is 40 years older than me, but these are some of the fondest memories I have with him. So one of the questions that I've asked to Prof. Malik Badri is Islamizing the curriculum of psychology enough? He answered that sometimes Islamizing the co-curriculum is much more important to achieve Islamization of psychology. Why? Through co-curriculum, you know, like students can be exposed to practical situations where they have to think about how does Islamic psychology relevant to that situation. Islamizing the co-curriculum is also important to Islamize the character of the students, because by Islamizing the character, you will get genuine Islamization of psychology, rather than, he used the term pedantic Islamization, very too scientific, so to speak. And that is why Prof. Malik Badri had suggested that we should Islamize in as many ways as we can. And he listed Islamization of the philosophy, Islamization of the psychology as the science, Islamization of psychology as an arts, and Islamization of psychology as a history. But I changed it a little bit to make it more easier to teach students or to write papers. I changed it to Islamizing the philosophy, Islamizing the theories, Islamizing the applications, and Islamizing the history. It is the co-curriculum that helps in Islamizing the applications, and not just clinical psychology, because that is what Prof. Malik Badri has been focusing on. It refers to many other applied disciplines in psychology. Question number 2. This is at his house at Gombak. Question number 2. When can we confidently say that we have Islamized psychology? That is a very tough question. And you know what his answer is? Until we have enough empirical research on Muslim psychology or Muslim data, it is difficult to say that we have Islamized psychology. In other words, relying totally on Quran and Hadith is not enough. Relying totally on early Muslim scholars' idea is not enough, because even early Muslim scholars collect empirical data. Sometimes they change their views, sometimes they have ikhtilaf with other early Muslim scholars, and what makes it an Islamic psychology back then. And that's why, as mentioned by Dr. Abdullah, Prof. Malik Badri sometimes talk about at-tafsil, that means to go back to the original, the Quran and Hadith and early Muslim scholars, and sometimes he talk about tawtin or indigenizing psychology. And that's why we may have Islamic how do I say it? Malaysian Islamic psychology, Indonesian Islamic psychology, Pakistani, Indian, or Bangladeshi Islamic psychology, Arab or Middle Eastern or Northern African Islamic psychology, or even European or American or Latin Islamic psychology, which may be different from one another. And that's what Tawteen or indigenization of psychology is all about, because different region might have different theories or different Islamic psychological theories or Islamic psychological application. And he also emphasized that Islamic psychology still need to be scientific. Although he doesn't believe that Islamic psychology is a science, it's both science and arts and a social science, but it is important to be almiyah or scientific. And it is not actually under Islamic studies. It is a separate discipline that Islamic students of Islamic studies may not be as well read as students in Islamic psychology. It is a social science, not a theological study. But of course, Quran and Hadith is the as Dr. Rahman mentioned just now, is the principle that we should not be having any disagreement about. Next question, question number 3. Should we put the term Quran and Hadith in the definition of psychology? I did this and I showed to him, and at that time, he mentioned that maybe at this time, we don't need to put the term Quran or Hadith in the definition of Islamic psychology. What's more important is the term soul. Once the Western world, the Western psychology, the secular psychology accepted the role of soul in influencing behavior and mental processes, we have achieved a lot already. And at that time, they will search, okay, from all these perspective about soul in psychology, which one is the most accurate, valid, and we are hoping that they will prefer Islamic psychology that is based on the Quran and Hadith. And when we talk about soul, most of us will refer to Ilm at-Tasawwuf, but actually Islamic psychology is not only about Tasawwuf. It is also about Aqidah, which deals with mental processes or cognitive processes. It also deals with Ibadah, which concerns behavior, and at the same time, Tasawwuf, which talk about emotion. And not forgetting, he also emphasized on applying psychology to da'wah and also tarbiyah, Islamic call and also Islamic education. And it's not as easy to say that everything starts with soul influence behavior and mental processes, but it's very complex. Soul can be the main effect or the primary variable. It can also be the moderator variables, can also be the mediator variables. I forgot to add, it can also be a suppressor variables. Another thing, when we discuss together about definition of Islamic psychology, whether we should use the term Islamic psychology. Dr. Abdullah had mentioned that there are even different approaches on Islamic psychology. Some prefer the term psychology of Islam that focus more on Quran and Hadith, or al-ilm an-nafs fil Islam. Some may prefer the term Islamic psychology or al-ilm an-nafs al-Islami. Some may prefer the term psychology from the Islamic perspective, al-ilm an-nafs fi manzur al-Islam. Actually, Prof. Malik Badri had used most of the terms, all of the terms used by different approaches. Like Dr. Abdullah mentioned just now, he accepted many variation, or are welcome, or are contributing to the Islamization of psychology. So I think it's more of a semantic discussion rather than which one is the truth and which one is false. And if you notice in the book Dilemma, he actually used the term from psychology from both Islamic and scientific perspective. Although he believed that being Islamic is scientific, but at that time, that is 1970s, it is already ahead of his time to give perspective, to talk about psychology from both scientific and Islamic perspective. I personally, after having all this discussion, I now prefer the term Islamic-scientific, because both are actually not two different things. So if it is Islamic, it is scientific. If it's scientific in its haqiqah, in its truest sense, then it is Islamic, because that's what happened during the early Muslim scholars era. Question number 4. How do we screen psychological ideas from early Muslim scholars who have issues in Aqidah matter? I'm not sure whether you have read that even among early Muslim scholars, they criticize a lot people like great people, great thinker, like great philosophers like Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, Al-Kindi. They even said that they have Aqidah problems, the problems in Aqidah, not purely Islamic. I asked Prof. Malik Badri, how do we go about using the ideas? And he said that it is similar to what happened right now. There are a lot of sincere Muslim psychologists who are Islamizing psychology, but they are trained in the West. So it takes time for them they may still be influenced by secular philosophy when they want to Islamize psychology, but they are sincere, just like Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, because it takes they really screen out lots of un-Islamic things from the Greek philosophy, and they include soul factor, and they refer to the Quran and Hadith. It's just that, at that time there are lots of what they call mazahib al-aqaidiyah, like Mu'tazila, Shia, and others. So we should understand the context where they are living. Same thing with we should not severely criticize those who are sincerely trying to Islamize psychology. Please remember, not all of them have Islamic training in Islamic studies. We should work together with them. And that is why there's a difference between methods and theory. I think most of us will use the same methods, more or less, but it may lead to different theories. And it is welcome to have different Islamic psychological theories. Even Ibn Sina have 2 different theories of emotion. Imagine that. Even the theories of soul, if you read Contemplation by Badri, although he said he prefer Ibn Qayyim concepts of an-nafs and ruh, for the sake of writing Contemplation, he will use the concepts explained by Al-Ghazali. So in other words, even on soul, great early Muslim scholars have disagreements. So it's okay for us to disagree on Islamic psychology in modern time. Question number 5. What is the role of Muslim psychologists in Islamic movement? I'm sure you noticed that when he wrote about who are the effective Islamizer of psychology, one of them is movement oriented, and he himself is one of the pioneer of Islamic movement in Sudan. He even traveled to India at that time to meet Abul A'la al-Maududi. And we discuss a lot. We talk about Hassan al-Banna, we talk about Sayyid Qutb, we even talk about contemporary leaders of Islamic movement. Well, one theme that emerged from our discussion is Islamic movement should learn to be more practical than rhetorical. More emotion, spiritual oriented rather than cognitive oriented. Like too much on halal, haram, too much on sunnah, bid'ah, too much on what do you call this, fiery speech, rather than human touch and being compassionate. Compassionate not only to the society, but compassionate to fellow du'at. So du'at is members of Islam or Islamic caller, rather than being too rigid in a lot of matters. And by movement oriented, you will see how the theory be applied, because all Islamic callers or du'at or da'i, they are actually aiming to change people's behavior and mental processes for the better. They are actually doing what psychologists are supposed to do. So if psychologists are not movement oriented, we may be becoming too theoretical in our Islamization. Question number 6. What is the role of Muslim students who already understood the atheistic philosophy of secular psychology? I'm sure you noticed that in almost every of his speech, he always criticized Freud and psychoanalysis, what's Skinerian behaviorism. Some people say he keep on repeating the same thing, but you must understand that there are still a lot of Muslim psychologists and social scientists who believe in Freud and Skinner. So it's his job to change that. But at IIM, these are students program. A student asked about, okay, we know what else can we do? So surprisingly, he called, I am one of the audiences, he called me to the stage to answer the question. As you can see, I'm not sitting on the stage. I'm sitting not on the chair on the stage, but on the stage itself. I should not sit at the same level as him. So I said that Prof. Malik Badri had done a lot in criticizing or developing macro level theories, criticizing psychoanalysis, behaviorism, humanistic, cognitive, logical perspective, and talk about spirituality and alternative. I said it's your job. I'm talking to the students among the audience to start Islamizing meso level and micro level theories. Actually, Prof. Malik had done a few of that when he talked about helping giving altruism in a number of his speeches. So there are a lot of other in each chapter of most psychology textbook. There are a lot of meso level and micro level theories that need to be Islamized or developed by Muslim students and also Muslim psychologists. Question number 7. What is the role of Muslim non-clinical applied psychology? Sometimes we feel it's unfair that people who are in the field of counseling, in the field of psychotherapy, in the field of clinical psychology, in the field of social worker, they can benefit a lot from Prof. Malik Badri, who was a clinical psychologist himself. So all his writing, the basic psychology part can be shared by all. But the application part, he gave maybe more than 80% related to clinical psychology or counseling or psychotherapy. So what about us? I am an organizational psychologist. What about us non-clinical applied psychologists? I've asked this question to him. Unfortunately, we do have a short discussion, but we don't have enough time to discuss it a lot. But Alhamdulillah, ISIP invited me, is it last week or 2 weeks ago, moderated by Fatima, Sister Fatima, on the topic, the dilemma of non-clinical Muslim applied psychologists, kind of like an offshoot of Prof. Malik Badri's book. And at that time, I discussed about why sometimes we wait for basic psychology to Islamize. And I have to admit, I have to do the same thing. Although I am an applied psychologist, I have written more about Islamization of basic psychology, such as Islamization of biological psychology, psychology of consciousness, sensation and perception, motivation and emotion, psychology of learning, psychology of personality, developmental psychology, because those are the things that are of immediate needs by a psychology lecturer, because they need to teach those core courses to all students. Whereas applied psychology courses are mostly elective. So that's the issue. But I mentioned in the previous ISIP talk that we should not wait for basic psychology to be Islamized first. The relationship can be bi-directional. If we can Islamize applied psychology, basic psychology will also benefit. They will test the theory more in the lab or in the field. So it will be a synergy between two fields, basic psychology and also applied psychology. And if you read Dilemma also, he mentioned that you can applied psychology can even apply neutral theories from Western psychology. That means not against and not supporting. So there are a lot of things that you can do in the field of maybe improving teaching technique, improving selection of workers. You don't need to have dalil for that. Of course, I am myself a graduate of Islamic studies. I can find a dalil on almost all disciplines in psychology and also chapters in psychology. But as a Muslim psychologist, if you're not well read in Islamic studies, you can still apply the neutral aspect, and you are actually contributing to Islamization of psychology. And we want to compare with Islamic studies, for example. You can find the difference between those who are well versed in the principle of usul fiqh, which is the principle of Islamic jurisprudence, and those who are involved in the field, those who know the maqasid syariah. Usually those who know the maqasid syariah are more practical, are more relevant, but they also and they feed back to the principles of the Islamic jurisprudence or usul fiqh. So my point here is, it should be bidirectional. You can start working on Islamization of psychology. You don't have to wait for all the basic psychology to be Islamized. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't need to have dalil all the time. If you've noticed, even some of Prof. Malik Badri's point doesn't need any spirituality component. For example, implosive therapy or emotional blasting therapy is just so straightforward. You don't need even to use ruqyah or to include spirituality, because the symptom is behavioral, observable, very symptomatic. So don't be shy, don't feel like having low self-esteem if you want to Islamize psychology, especially if you are non-clinical applied psychology. I'm sure there are many aspiring organizational psychologists out there among you, forensic psychologists, health psychologists, educational psychologists, sports psychologists, environmental psychologists, and a lot of other disciplines. We need to move on and start Islamizing those fields, inspired by Prof. Malik Badri's ideas. I guess that's all from me. So again, I'm still having a sad moment talking about my reminiscing my conversation is for Prof. Malik Badri. We truly hope that Allah will grant him maghfirah and also rahmah to the soul of Almarhum Prof. Dr. Malik Badri. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khairan katsira. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Back to Brother Jamaluddin.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, dear Dr. Alizi, for a very thorough Q&A with Professor Badri that we are now witnessing in afterhand, your beautiful conversations, and very interesting to capture the sincerity in your conversations, like the sincerity to serve the field of psychology, the sincerity to understand how to apply it from an Islamic point of view. It's very, very admirable. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Alizi. Please, round of applause for our excellent speaker, Dr. Alizi. Thank you so much. Actually, we would like people to ask questions to you as well. And before I give the mic to Sister Fatima, she will now lead us when it comes to the students' anecdotes with regards to their relationship to Professor Badri, Rahimullah. Actually, I just saw that Professor Dareen and also Dr. Salami joined us. Professor Dareen, I know I haven't spoken with you today, but I just wanted to, because we always appreciate you and we love you for the sake of Allah. If you would like to tell us maybe 1 minute. And by the way, Professor Dareen, all of our thoughts with all of our brothers and sisters in Turkey. We are very saddened to hear about all the difficulties. MashaAllah, that's your son. So Professor Dareen is our teacher, one of our leading scholars in the field of Islamic psychology, also very close to Professor Badri, Rahimullah. And Dr. Salami, if you can just unmute yourself and also just open up your camera. Dr. Salami was also very close. Could you please highlight all the teachers, Dr. Abdallah as well, so we see all these beautiful teachers and also, of course, students of Professor Badri. Dr. Salami as well, if possible, if you can highlight him. So Professor Dareen, very briefly, maybe 1 minute, and also Dr. Salami, 1 minute.
I would like to maybe tell my dream. Last time, maybe some of my friends didn't hear this dream. After 2 months, I saw Ustaz Malik Badri Rahimahullah in my dream. He was like in his 50s. He wore a Pakistani kind of, gown, beautiful. He was smiling. He touched my head. I felt something not from this life, not from this world, like electrical shock, And believe me, I couldn't forget this experience for like days, Such an interesting spiritual, pleasure out of his touching on my head. So this is really, alhamdulillah, showing that he still look after us, even from other world. Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
MashaAllah. Beautiful, beautiful. I remember you mentioned about the dream last year when we had the tribute. SubhanAllah, so beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you for sharing the dream, Professor Dareen. And please, our du'as to you and to all of our beloved brothers and sisters in Turkey. Inshallah, we will be at your service if you need anything. Dr. Salami, any thoughts from your side? Dr. Salami was with us in the first tribute we had, actually. He was organizing it. Dr. Salami, nice to see you.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum
I really appreciate having me to join this program today. It's a good honor to be here. Yeah, it's just another anniversary of our late Prof, Professor Malik Badri. Yeah, I always have a reflection of how he has treated us in the class. It's such a memory time I will never forget my whole life. Each time the name comes to my mind or I read on the screen, I just have this image from the class in RUM. And the little I can just share today is, well, the last class we had with him, one of my colleagues asked him, what can you tell us that we will never forget in our whole life? I mean, this is outside the class. This is outside the course, outside the topics. So he gave us two stories. Time will not permit me to relate both. Two stories of his life events. One is when he attended and gave some kind of therapy to a minister in Sudan. And the other is when he was imprisoned in Sudan and how he was able to give therapy to one of the inmates in the prison. Because at the time in Sudan, the government was like clamping down on dissent, and Prof. Malik is not only just a scholar, he's also an activist. And I can connect that with what Dr. Abdallah Rothman has said, and how he was able to connect with Malcolm X. He did told us about his connection with Malcolm X also. So he told us the stories, and it was so amazing, connecting his expertise, his professionalism with what goes on around him. And is somebody that, you know, when he teaches you, you hardly forget. You hardly forget whatever he tells you. That alone gives a very clear indication of the fact that he speaks from, you know, he doesn't only teach, but he speaks from the departments of his heart, telling you what exactly you need to know and what you need to do and what is expected of you to do as a psychologist, you know? So yeah, he shared a lot with us, and of course, because of time, and it's so amazing. My teachers, Dr. Alizi and Prof. Rahmatullah, did an interview with him. And I also had an interview with him when he came to Kuala Lumpur after leaving Istanbul, I think 2018 or so, before the lockdowns, before the COVID. I also had an interview with him. I'm even yet to publish that. And one of the questions I did ask him, which he has been able to share with us in class before to clarify more, is relating to this concept of mind-body interaction, the placebo effect. Although he couldn't write much on this area, but he did make it very clear to us that these are, you know, some of the modern scientific means to explain how the soul actually influences the body, how the mind influences the body, how the unseen part of our human functioning influences our behavioral activities and what we do. And he did explain this physiologically. So we have this aspect of Islamic psychology connecting to physiology. And there's another aspect he did share connecting to neuropsychology. All right, so there's a lot we did learn from him, and we just need to, like, you know, continue to try to understand some of his legacies and how we can move on. with such. Although these are just the little I can share for now. Thank you so much for having me.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Salami. Beautiful insights. I love the dream, and I love also the interaction as a student, you know, how he was as a teacher when you were doing your studies at IAIP. Thank you all. Sister Fatima, feel free to join us now, and let's share a little bit about the anecdotes from the students all over the world, and also all of us who are, you know, very much appreciative of Professor Malik Badri's and his students' works.
Barakallahu fikum. Thank you, Brother Jamaluddin. So honored to see all of our beautiful teachers here together. It's Dr. Salami also gave a lecture for ISIP a few weeks ago in January on the mind-body interaction. And actually, I'll just share that in the chat as well. So, alhamdulillah wa shukr Allah. And I want to thank our sister Aya and sister Kauthar, both from our ISIP strategic team as well. We're going to share just a few quotes, and we're going to open the floor for reflection. These are just, you know, as part of Dr. Malik, Professor Malik Badri's legacy as, you know, something that I've been impacted by today. By Dr. Abdallah and Dr. Alizi's presentations. It's just really centering on how not to just gain the knowledge, but also transform, and the role of the soul, as Dr. Alizi was saying, and also not to just have a transactional religiosity. So some of the quotes here that Sister Aya and Sister Kauthar have been, and that we put together all together, we thought that these were really poignant kind of quotes from Dr. Malik Badri, and we would love to share that as part of his legacy today here with everyone who's joining. And we'd love to hear your reflections, and also from our teachers, if there's any other further explanations or insights they could also provide surrounding these quotes. So we'll do that just for a little bit. We just have about three of these quotes that the team has put together. So just give me a moment and I will share that. Okay. So this is our first quote. As Dr. Rothman had shared, the dilemma of the Muslim psychologists in 1979, a really, you know, important work of Dr. Malik that kind of brought him into the global sphere and becoming more well known through this book. So this is a quote from there. Unthinking repetition of Western theories and practices in the discipline of psychology probably presents one of the most serious threats to the status of Islamic ideology among our Muslim scholars and laity. Western psychologists propound theories about man's personality, motivation, and behavior, which are in many ways contradictory to Islam. These theories and their applications are carefully sugar-coated with the attractive cover of science. So we'll leave the chat for about a minute, and if someone would like to, you know, just ponder on this particular quote, or a reflection, or what stands out or resonates, or even a question, and we have some of our teachers here who could perhaps also help to reflect upon that. So maybe I can invite one of our teachers, Sister Aya, thank you. So profound, mashallah, we are living this on a daily basis. May Allah guide us to the right path. Thank you, Sister Aya. Ghariba Mahfouz writes, Jazakallah khairan. I also had the privilege to listen to Dr. Badri ever since, and I never stopped following him. Oh, yes, Sister Ghariba. Would you like to?
You can unmute
Yes.
yourself. Sister
Yeah, you
Ghariba.
can unmute yourself.
Or if you want, you can write and we can read it up. It's up to you to decide. Whatever it finds most suitable for you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, bro, is that brother Ghariba? Oh, sorry.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan for the good work you are doing. Please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Alhamdulillah. The first time what I know about Dr. Malik Badri, I first saw a video of him from my brother's laptop, Garba UCC, and it was about Islamic psychology and philosophy that took place, I think, in Malaysia also. Qatar. I think it took place in Qatar. And then the way that he explained the concept, Islamic psychology and philosophy into the light. And one insight that I got from the explanation of religion and spirituality is when he was explaining Suratul, I think, Kafirun. He was saying, God called kuffar ad-din. What they were doing, they were worshiping idols, but God called them with din. So he was saying, Lakum dinukum waliya din. That is the context that Dr. did explain. They are kuffar. They are worshiping idols, everybody knows. But God is asking us not to call them kuffar. They are something called din. From there, I had a different perception of din. And it's so sad that today, most of our scholars, we are taking people out of the deen. We don't even call non-Muslims into the Muslim, but rather with the Muslims, we are taking Muslims outside the religion. We are saying you are a Maliki, you are not part. You are a Shafi, you are not part. You are a Sufi, you are not part. You are a Hanafi or Shia. Meanwhile, there is a lot of work that we are supposed to do because the world is transforming. And politics, not as in the current politics, but politics as a way of life is very, very important. We should have an Islamic politics, how we are going to teach the deen or to spread the message of the Islam. Sometimes you accommodate something, even if it's not part of Islam, but if the thing is not going to affect Islam, why are you not going to accommodate it? And currently, most of us, we are living in a non-Muslim country. Let's say in Ghana, it's not 100% Islamic. So whatever, when we go to work, almost 90% of the workers are Christianity. So if you try to do very rigid or I'll say an intense Islam, you are going to cause problems to yourself and to Islam as well. So from that, I respect. Ever since then, I never stopped following doctor because that was my perception. I don't see scholars teaching that. Somebody will say, don't even shake hands of kuffar. Yes, shaking hands is wrong. But we know Allah judged by intention. Anybody that didn't give us hands, we don't give him hands. But when they give us hands, we just shake and we forget. We are maintaining a good social because we are even making Islam a prison for those who are coming. Don't do this, don't do that. I don't know how to even explain, but ever since I had Dr. May Allah have mercy upon him and increase his maqam hereafter. And may God bless you with your good work. Sorry for it's just like that. I never prepared. I came to work on the weekend, so I'm right now working, and then I was following the lectures.
Barakallahu fikum.
Brother. Thank you for your great insights. MashaAllah.
Thank you so much, brother. And yeah, that's what this tribute is for. It's for all of us to reconnect with how Professor Malik Badri has affected us and our lives or our thinking or changed as something about the way that we thought. And so I really appreciated you sharing your insight in his teaching of the Surah Al-Kafirun, and the way that we can use dawah, and then the ways that we are adhering to how we refer to people. So that was really important. Thank you for sharing that. Alhamdulillah. I believe Sister Saira has a question. Please share about your understanding, and this is for our teachers, inshallah. Please share about your understanding of Dr. Malik Badri's psychospiritual perspective as a psychologist, and Dr. Badri's future vision of character development of the self and cross-cultural application in clinical context.
Anybody
Dr.
would like to answer, perhaps?
Yeah,
Dr. Rothman,
Dr.
Dr. Alizi.
Dr. Alizi.
I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm an organizational psychologist. But I think you can notice how the Quranic approaches to during Meccan period and Medinan period, there's a little bit different there, because the characters of the Quraysh during Meccan period is different from the character of the non-Muslim in Medina and Munafiqin in Medina, the Ansarid in Medina compared to Muhajirin in the Makkah. So yeah, that is to me is a cross-cultural application in organizational context, not in clinical context, but in organizational context. So there's a different of what is uslub in English, literary style of the Quran when dealing with different psychology of the people the Quran is addressing. So yeah, there should be a cross-cultural application in different organizational contexts. Thank you.
Jazakallah. Dr. Alizi. Dr. Rothman, would you like to add anything to that question?
Sure. Just briefly, I think Dr. Malik's perspective on the psychospiritual perspective is such that, like Dr. Alizi said in one of his answers to his question, that we need to focus on the soul, and that, you know, often when we focus on Quran and Sunnah, because people's orientation to Islam and their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is often damaged from their early childhood and how Islam has been taught to many of us, we can miss the point of reconnecting to our fitrah. And so for both Muslims and non-Muslims alike, what I think a big part of his message was that we need to get to the core of what makes us human, which is our spiritual reality, and honoring the ruh aspect of our human condition, and not staying with this material orientation to an understanding of a separate self. And there's many, many Muslims, unfortunately, who follow the deen. They're good Muslims, they believe, their belief is straight, but their relationship to understanding the development and the depth of their being is lacking, because it has been lacking in the way that Islam has been taught. And so to speak to this idea of how does it apply to cross-cultural application in clinical context, Muslims, non-Muslims, all contemporary people are in need of reconnecting to the soul and reconnecting to the fitrah of our soul, and doing that by reconnecting to the fitrah of living in a way in accordance with this natural reality of spirituality. And so this is his primary important psychospiritual perspective of why psychology, because psychology is a study of the soul. Yes, we're learning about the study of the soul from Islam, that's informing how we understand the whole picture from a multidimensional perspective, but it's still the medicine for what humanity needs today to reconnect with the reconnection of our core identity as a soul. And then that work that we do to uncover that is developing our character. The development of character is this process of purification, of tazkiyah, that we need to do, but we can't do that unless we recognize that we have a soul that is covered up, right? And so this is why this idea of focusing on the soul is so fundamentally important, and it can transcend religion and religiosity and even, you know, one's relative knowledge.
MashaAllah, Dr. Abdallah. Thank you so much. Great insights.
I see Sister Zubaydah has her hand up. Sister Zubaydah, did you want to share an insight or a personal reflection, either on the quote or something related?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sorry, I wanted to type it up, but I think I thought it might take a bit long, and just now we move on. So I think I really appreciated Dr. Abdullah's feedback right now, because I'm not a psychologist. I think I'm doing the intro at the moment, but I think after seeking so many questions, I literally have this question as in, you know, to what extent, I mean, is there curricular or availability, or basically, how can I say, being looked at or considered? Because I feel that it's exactly that shortfall that is why we're facing spaces where youth and people at large are challenged, you know, within their mental space, or struggling, or just the dynamics of life, because of that disconnect of the natural way of living, in which, and this reflection, I think, of on his book that you just mentioned, I feel that it's no longer, it's not just Western psychologists, it's actually society is now being conditioned to that. So we're living, and our kids and our, and I think our offspring are going to be facing generations of people being conditioned in a certain way. And is there a way or platform that's currently being considered? Because I think how I ended up here was that I saw that the Islamic psychology is possibly the answer to people understanding their better selves, you know? So I was, and how do we get this across in terms of education, curricular considerations in platforms around the world? And sorry, I'm from South Africa. So yeah, I suppose I'm just kind of keen if that is a space that is being considered and looked at the moment, or if anyone's aware of it, because I'm very passionate about that space at the moment. Does that go? So yeah, I think that's just a kind of a question.
Thank you so much for your reflection, Sister. MashaAllah. Thank you all for your reflections in the chat as well. I see here that Brother Hanif is writing, I was fortunate to invite Dr. Malik Badri twice to UK for talks on Islamic psychology, spend time with him, hearing his thoughts and wisdom on the subject. Very useful to connect with new students. MashaAllah, Brother Hanif. We would love to be in touch with you as well. Where can we find the talks? Is it recorded? Is it in any... Could you share the recording in the chat perhaps, or link? If so, Brother Hani, feel free to do so. We would love to see your talks, inshallah. Feel free to reach out to us as well. We would love to know more about your experience, inshallah. All right, Sister Fatima, let's do the two. I'm just noticing that we're over time. That's why, if we just look at these two, inshallah.
Sure. Yep. So we're sharing another quote here. This is from Professor Dr. Malik Badri's article, The Islamization of Psychology. It's why, it's what, it's how, and it's who. Faith in Allah Ta'ala and the belief that He is the creator and sustainer of this universe, from the tiniest subatomic particle to the greatest galaxy in the heavens. He knows the secrets of the hearts of men and knows what is beneath the secrets subconscious. Everything that happens to man must have a hikmah or divine wisdom behind it. There is life after this life, and man is accountable for whatever he has done during his brief stay on Earth. These beliefs would make it necessary for any psychologist working with Muslim subjects to Islamize his work. I feel like this is also really resonating with what our teachers here today have been talking about. Dr. Alizi was mentioning that as well. So any reflections, you feel free to, or what's standing out for you. If we want to just take a moment to ponder this teaching from our beloved Professor Badri.
Can I add something, Sister Fatima?
Please do, please do.
Well, in the last 3 years of his life, may Allah have mercy on his soul, we started a new project of, creating a kind of therapy from the lives of prophets. And he said, may Allah take my life after I finish this book. Unfortunately, we have gone through Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, Yaqub alayhi salam. In Moses, Musa alayhi salam, we learned that this gradual desensitization of phobias like the scare of a snake, how Allah Almighty treated Musa alayhi salam, gave him therapy, divine therapy, how not to be afraid of the snake. And Yusuf alayhi salam, we talk about the dreams, dream interpretation. The chapter Yusuf is all about dreams. So we started this project of taking all the examples from the Holy Quran, all the psychological wisdom. But unfortunately, that was very late time of his life. He was very, old. And when I invited him to other side in Istanbul, he had very big difficulty coming there. But mashallah, even this very old age, I have seen in him this great, endeavor, enthusiasm. And unfortunately, we have covered few prophets only. But I always tell my friends of Ustaz Malik Badri, let's continue this job and bring new therapies like how we can have a grief or loss from the story of Yaqub alayhi salam.
Yeah.
There are so many examples from the lives of prophets. Inshallah, we do this in future with the friends of Ustaz Malik Badri Rahimullah. Thank you.
Ameen, inshallah. Barakallahu fikum. What a beautiful, inspirational aspect that you're working on and had the pleasure of working on with Dr. Badri. And you're absolutely correct. There's so much in those stories that we're so grateful that you've started to unpack, and that inshallah, as you said, the students can continue. Is there anything else in the chat? Okay, so we'll just share our last one, and then we'll do a collective dua, inshallah, for our dear Professor Badri. So this is from Professor Malik Badri's Counseling and Psychotherapy from an Islamic Perspective. This is also an article or a chapter in a book, I believe. To practice psychotherapy in a society which has lost its faith in its religious institutions, a society in which religion has been publicly demoted, a society haunted by an ugly religious past of inquisitions and the burning of hundreds of innocent victims, a society which was able to flourish only when it discarded religion. In such a society, it is understandable that counselors and therapists should be advised to steer away from embarrassing religious topics and pursue the secularized, materialistic path of the overwhelming majority. So any comments, reflections? We can just take a moment to reflect upon that as well.
I actually had a reflection on this, because it's kind of like understanding the context of where we are deriving our knowledge from, and which is so important because we're all contextual creatures as well. We're not, and it alludes to maqasid al-sharia, the objectives of sharia, and the importance of understanding the societal aspects of our responsibilities, and how the societal aspect affects our individual aspects as well. So the psychotherapy that are perhaps rooted in the Western tradition is rooted in an epistemological context and an ontological reality, which is quite far-fetched from the Islamic paradigm. So it's very important to understand also history of Western psychology, its roots in colonization. And Texter is a very interesting historian. He speaks about the psychology without the soul and its trajectory to become psychology without the soul. So I think that, as Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah, is alluding to in this beautiful quote, is to understand where modern psychology comes from. And we had the honor in the CMC program to study with Dr. Samir about the modern subjectivity and how modernity has shaped us as human beings, but also as Muslims. We're not immune because we're Muslims. We're not immune to this. We're also subconsciously or even consciously affected by this. And at the same time, understanding how modernity has shaped psychology as a field. So that's what I was thinking about, awareness of the context, and try to, in that sense, be critically aware as we engage in working with fellow human beings when it comes to counseling.
Barakallahu feekum. Thank you so much, Brother Jamaluddin. Alhamdulillah wa shukrullah. And with that, inshallah, we're going to ask all of our attendees and all of us to bring our hearts together. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to brighten and expand Professor Malik Badri's grave, grant him Jannatul Firdaus, grant his family patience and perseverance. As Sayyid Jamaluddin had mentioned at the beginning, Sister Dr. Fatima Abdullah, we pray for her health. His daughter is actually moving today, so we pray that Allah blesses her new home and protects his whole family. And they convey their warm salams and deep appreciation to all of the colleagues and teachers and ISIP and everybody who is here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive him and forgive us, and help us, inshallah, through the teachings of everyone who's been here today and shared and reflected. And may we continue, inshallah, to aspire to continue his legacy and his teachings. So with that, could we invite perhaps Professor Suleiman, if you would like to read a Fatiha or a closing dua for us.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر صدق الله العظيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين آمين اللهم اغفر لحينا وميتنا وشاهدنا وغائبنا وذكرنا وأنثانا وصغيرنا وكبرنا اللهم من أحييته منا فأحيه على الإسلام ومن توفيته منا فتوفه على الإيمان وخص أستاذ مالك بدر رحمه الله بالروح والراحة والمغفرة والرضوان في الجنة يا الله اللهم إن كان هو محسنا فزد في إحسانه يا رب وإن كان مسيئا أخطأه فتواجز عنه ولقه الأمن والبشرى والكرامة والزلفى برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Ya Allah, today we met to commemorate the, Ustaz Malik Badri's passing away. Have mercy on his soul, Ya Allah. Increase his level in paradise. Give him a lot of reward for enlightening our lives with Islamic psychology. And Ya Allah, give us power and capacity to continue his path and give the light of Islam in the psychological world to as a mercy, as the Prophet ﷺ was mercy, rahmatan lil alameen, for all the world. Also make Ustaz Malik Badri and his legacy rahmatan lil alameen, and make us, inshallah, a continuous charity for him, inshallah. We all read a Fatiha to his soul and to the passing away of all our scholars who served in the path of Islamic psychology. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you.
Barakallahu feekum, Professor Dareen. Barakallahu feekum, Dr. Abdallah Rothman. Barakallahu feekum, Dr. Alizi, Dr. Salami, Sister Fatima for hosting. Amazing. Thank you, Sister Kauthar and Sister Aya for collecting the quotes from Professor Badri. Thank you to all of your questions, Sister Zubayda, Brother Hanif, Brother Qariba, sorry, and rest of the team. I know there was a lot of questions. Sister Sayra, Sister Nur Husna, all of you who questioned, Sister Eileen. Jazakallah khairan for joining us today. Feel free to continue your questions and reflections with regards to Professor Badri's legacy in our WhatsApp groups so we can have a lively discussion. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any ideas of how we can further strengthen the legacy of Professor Malik Badri, Rahimullah. We have one idea that we want to announce, and we want to create, and this is something I spoke with Dr. Abdallah about and some other of our teachers and colleagues, to do some form of award dedicated to Professor Badri for like student contributions, student participations, student reflections, best essay, etc. So we're on the phase of creating this award. So hopefully make dua for us. We will inshallah disseminate this next year. We spoke with Dr. Fatima Abdallah and also Professor Badri's family, and they have given their blessing for us to do this, inshallah. So we will highlight the different movements, different initiatives in the field of Islamic psychology. So inshallah, all of you in the Zoom chat and all of you in the participant panel today, you will be the next Professor Badri, inshallah. So continue your legacy, continue your studies, continue your scholarly work, continue your clinical practice. Inshallah, we will highlight that. And so we will definitely inform more about this information, about this initiative, inshallah. That will be such an honor. All right, everyone. We'll wish you all a great day, inshallah. Extend our greetings to your family and loved ones. And please keep also all of our brothers and sisters in Syria and in Turkey in your precious du'as as well, as they're going through trials and tribulation as we speak, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of our beloved brothers and sisters in Turkey and in Syria, inshallah. Ameen, ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And please forgive us for any shortcomings, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you for your participations and questions in the chat. Thank you.
Wa alaikum salam. Ma salama.